Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking on what is basically one of the greatest heists in biology, breaking into a cell to steal its chemical machinery. We're bridging the gap between theoretical enzyme science and practical laboratory isolation. We're going to take a really close look at how we pull these incredible biological machines out of their natural environment and prep them for our own scientific applications.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be going chronologically, starting with the need for isolation, then extraction, purification, precision techniques, monitoring activity, and finally wrapping up with a quick knowledge check.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the need for isolation. Why purify?
So let's start with a foundational question. Why even go through the tedious process of isolation in the first place? I mean, whole cells naturally perform these reactions, right? Well, think of a whole cell like a bustling, chaotic city. It's cheap, sure, but it is packed full of uncontrolled metabolism and unwanted byproducts. Isolating an enzyme pulls it completely out of that chaos. It gives us this incredibly high selectivity without those messy side reactions. But getting that pristine selectivity, that requires a dedicated, rigorous extraction process.
Moving on to Section 2, extraction, breaking the cell.
So how do we actually get these biological machines out of their housing? Well, keep this step-by-step roadmap in mind as we go. We start with the raw biological source, maybe it's plant tissue or a genetically modified cell line, and then we move through homogenization, centrifugation, and finally into purification.
Our first major hurdle is basically the vault. If our target enzyme is intracellular, meaning it's trapped deep inside the cytoplasm or an organelle, we absolutely must physically breach the cell to access it. Now, extracellular enzymes are a bit easier to harvest, but for intracellular targets, we really have no choice but to break in. And to do that, we use homogenization. Honestly, think of it as controlled violence. Using things like ultrasound or freeze crashing, we forcefully shatter the cell wall and membrane, but it has to be carefully calibrated. We want to break that tough outer armor without destroying the incredibly delicate enzyme structures hidden inside.
Once we've broken the cells open, we're left with this messy soup called a homogenate. Because all matter has mass, we use a centrifuge to separate it. By spinning the sample incredibly fast, the heavy cell walls and membranes are forced to the bottom, leaving our lighter proteins suspended in the liquid up top. Notably, we almost always do this in a highly controlled, cold system. Why? To prevent heat from literally cooking or denaturing our target enzymes. The result is what we call a crude extract.
Which brings us to Section 3. Purification, refining the extract. We now have our crude extract, but it's still a pretty messy soup of thousands of different proteins and nucleic acids. Now, that's perfectly fine for basic exploratory research in the lab, but for anything commercial or medical, it's a total non-starter. Stringent regulations absolutely demand a highly refined extract to eliminate any rogue, potentially dangerous side reactions from unwanted cellular debris.
So how do we refine it? We use a technique called buffer precipitation. See, in a solution, proteins kind of stay afloat because of repulsive electrostatic forces and hydration layers. Buffer precipitation slowly dials down those forces. This allows our specific target proteins to start clumping together, a process we call nucleation, and eventually they just precipitate right out of the solution so we can isolate them.
All right, Section 4, Precision Techniques, Affinity Chromatography.
Even after precipitation, we need absolute precision to get the high-quality purification necessary for modern biotechnology. Enter affinity chromatography. This happens in 3 critical phases. First up, loading. We pour our mixture in. Then, separation. This is where our target enzyme selectively binds to highly specific immobilized receptors, kind of like a His tag grabbing onto metal beads, while all the impurities just wash right on through. Finally, elution. We subtly alter the conditions to release our pure target enzyme from those receptors so we can safely collect it.
Now, you might be asking, why do we use these polymer-bound reversible inhibitors as the receptors? Basically because they act like the perfect molecular bait. They securely grab the enzyme without actually triggering a catalytic reaction, which keeps the protein completely intact for collection. They don't damage the target, they are highly specific to our proteins over smaller, simpler peptides, and, as a really nice bonus, they're easily recyclable for your next batch.
Section 5, monitoring enzyme activity.
So, we've isolated it. But the final, absolutely crucial step is proving that the thing actually works. Since an enzyme is a catalyst, we don't just weigh it on a scale to see if it's there. We measure its activity. Literally, how fast does it convert a substrate to a product? To do this, we run an enzyme assay. The basis of an assay is continuous tracking over time, essentially dosing the enzyme to see its active catalytic concentration.
A super common way to monitor this is the absorption assay. This technique uses photometric measurements to watch a chromophore, which is just the part of a molecule responsible for its color, change over time. It's incredibly dynamic to see. As the substrate degrades or the product forms, the absorption spectrum shifts, giving us real-time data on the exact activity rate of the enzyme.
Let's wrap things up with Section 6, Module 1, Knowledge Check.
Let's pause for a second and synthesize what we've covered. Think critically about the journey we just took, all the way from a whole living cell to a purified isolate. Why is an active assay actually required? Why couldn't we just, weigh the final protein powder on a scale and call it a day?
Well, the answer is that physical presence simply does not equal biological activity. We absolutely must run an assay to confirm that those violent steps, like homogenization or centrifugation, didn't accidentally denature or destroy the enzyme. We need to continuously monitor product formation, precisely calculate that correlation factor of activity to volume, and ultimately determine the true specific purity of what we've actually extracted.
So, we know we can use inhibitors as molecular bait to catch enzymes in a column. But consider this final thought. How does the dynamic, microscopic flexibility of an enzyme's active site actually dictate the type of inhibitor we can use to control it? What happens when the bait becomes the enemy? Think about that for a bit, and I'll see you in our next explainer.
Enzymes act as biological catalysts. Their primary function is to lower the activation energy required to drive a chemical reaction. They accomplish this entirely through their physical structure. Historically, we described the structure using the lock and key model. This model assumes the enzyme has a rigid geometric shape, a perfectly formed active site that acts as a strict security checkpoint, accepting only one highly specific substrate. But proteins are highly dynamic. Under the induced fit model, the enzyme actually warps and wraps around the substrate. Driven by van der Waals and hydrophobic forces, the protein shifts its shape to maximize contact. The initial geometric fit ensures the correct raw material binds, but it is that subsequent dynamic movement, the folding and tightening around the target, that physically forces the chemical reaction to occur. This chart translates that physical interaction into the standard Michaelis-Menten kinetic curve. We measure the concentration of the substrate on the horizontal axis and the resulting velocity of the chemical reaction on the vertical axis. As we add more substrate, the curve steepens and eventually plateaus. This ceiling is Vmax. It represents the absolute maximum speed the system can achieve, occurring only when every available active site in the environment is saturated with a substrate molecule. On the horizontal axis, we define Km. This specific value represents the exact amount of substrate required to reach exactly half of the Vmax ceiling. The Km dictates the enzyme's affinity. A lower Km value indicates a highly efficient enzyme, because it takes very little raw material to ramp up production to that halfway mark. This unaltered curve represents a perfectly optimized system. From this baseline, any external variable introduced into the environment will alter either the Vmax speed limit or the Km affinity. Some enzymes are physically incomplete apoenzymes, lacking the precise shape to bind a substrate. To function, they require an external element, like a metal cofactor. Snapping into the protein forces the active site to align, creating a fully active holoenzyme. Enzymes operate as modular machines. Removing a single essential element, like an iron ion, prevents structural alignment and halts the entire metabolic pathway. On the left, a competitive inhibitor mimics the substrate, hijacking the active site. Right, this flattens our kinetic curve. Flooding the system with substrate displaces these inhibitors, keeping the Vmax ceiling unchanged. But Km shifts right, requiring far more substrate to reach half Vmax. Competitive inhibition is a numbers game. It slows the initial reaction rate, but the system overpowers the blockade with a massive volume of raw materials. A non-competitive inhibitor binds to a secondary allosteric location, physically warping the primary active site. Substrates cannot connect, plateauing the graph below the original Vmax, while Km remains aligned. Flooding the system cannot repair this permanently lowered speed ceiling. Consider the sequence of events. What happens if an inhibitor only binds to the structure after the substrate has already entered the enzyme? This chart maps the uncompetitive trap. The inhibitor locks the enzyme-substrate complex together, so no product can be released. With active sites functionally removed, the Vmax ceiling drops, and the trapped substrate skews the Km value lower. Allosteric disruption permanently freezes or breaks the molecular machinery. Unlike direct competition, you cannot reverse this shutdown with brute force. We consolidate these mechanics into a single kinetic matrix, mapping the 3 inhibitor types against their effects on speed limit and affinity. The logic remains physical. A competitive inhibitor fights for space. A non-competitive inhibitor warps the shape. An uncompetitive inhibitor traps the substrate. These mechanics dictate modern medicine. Everyday drugs like paracetamol rely on perfectly engineered competitive inhibitors. When a biological chain reaction causes a fever, these molecules systematically target and shut down specific active sites to stop the reaction. Enzyme kinetics map physical interactions on a molecular scale. They provide the explicit structural rules we use to design the drugs that control biological processes and save lives.